Hello, my friends. Hello, and welcome once again to Stately Vaughan Manor, where Roger and I have returned because it's time for my weekend reading report. Yes, once again, I will tell you all about all the thrilling things that I read during the past week. And it's not a lot of stuff this time. The past week, it started off well, then got really busy. That's how it goes in life sometimes. But I did read some stuff, and let's talk about it. Okay, so slowly going through the 500 book challenge, the challenge where I'm reading 500 books that I own before I will buy any new ones. And I finished, what number was this? This was book number 113 in the challenge. And it's a book I've had hanging around literally for decades, intending to read, and I never got to it until now. I finally finished The Anubis Gates by Tim Powers. So my good friend Justin gave this book to me years ago in the 90s and told me how awesome it was. You'd love this book. It's awesome. I said, yeah, I'll read it. And then I didn't read it. In fact, this book was in a closet here at the manor for over 10 years. And then I stumbled upon it and go, oh yeah, I remember that book. Finally read this book. I can say this book was worth the wait. This book is fantastic. So this book, this is actually the first printing of this book. It actually came out as a Ace paperback back in, what year was this? This came out in 1983. Came out in 1983. Back when I was 12. All about time travel and magic and adventure and fun and really scary stuff. So this book has been categorized under different categories. I've seen this referred to as a science fiction book. In fact, Ace puts science fiction on the spine here, probably because it involves time travel. It is very much a fantasy novel that involves time travel. Science fiction and fantasy, of course, are two different things. The moment magic shows up in a novel, it's not science fiction, it's fantasy. Magic makes fantasy, right? So it's very much a fantasy novel, but I've also seen this on a list of best horror novels because it does have some pretty scary moments in this, and the villains are just outright terrifying. Great villains in this book, I have to say. So what's this book about? Okay, Professor Doyle, who has had a tragic past, Professor Doyle. He's a literature professor, I believe. He's very interested in poetry. He's writing a biography of a mysterious poet. And he goes to work for an organization called Dire. Now, you know from the fact that he's going to work for an organization called Dire that things are going to go very wrong, and also that this book doesn't take itself too seriously. And of course, things go wrong. He's sent on a mission, a time travel mission, which is supposed to be of short duration. Go there, do this thing, come back. But he gets trapped in 1910 in London. Now, Doyle is just an average college professor, right? He's not a man of action. But throughout this extraordinarily entertaining novel, he transforms in more than one way into a man of action. And it's really fun to see that whole process. I knew this was good when I first started reading it. The first couple chapters, I was like, this is pretty good. It became great as the novel went on. And I was really sorry to see it end, really. Nice ending, too. I was wondering as I was reading this, I talked about this a bit last week because I had started it. I was wondering if it was going to stick the landing, and it does. It has a good ending. This whole book is great. Highly recommended. I highly recommend this book. Glad I finally got to it. I have a lot of books like this that have just been sitting around for years, and I really intended to read them. So glad I finally got to this one. It only took a couple decades, I got to it. Fantastic book. The Anubis Gates by Tim Powers. This is actually the only Tim Powers book that I've read. I would like to read more, but I don't own any other Tim Powers books. So, going to have to wait for this whole challenge to be over. And once it is, I will buy some more Tim Powers books one of these days when I'm 56 or 57 or whenever the hell this challenge ends. And I read that. And then I read another book. This was book 114. This is for Roger's Cheap Old Book Club. Roger over here, my talkative friend, has his own book club. And every month we will read a cheap old book. Very cheap. Free, in fact. All of the books that Roger chooses for his Cheap Old Book Club are available in the public domain. And this month's book was this one. This is John Buchan's The 39 Steps, which is an old-timey spy novel that takes place right before World War I. And I had heard about this book, but it turns out I had never read this book. Short little thing. It's only 112 pages long in this edition, the authorized edition. Although it is available for free on Project Gutenberg, as all of Roger's picks are. And so I read this. It actually, because I was so busy, it took me a couple of days to read. And this is one of those books where really, ideally, you could just sit down and read the whole thing without interruption because it just rockets forward. It has a very exciting plot. This is an exciting book. You really want to know what's going to happen next. It's a really cool book. So, and it was, I was reading it this week where I kept, I had to read a few pages and put it down and come back to it later. And like I said, that's not the way you want to read this book. It is full of coincidence. A lot of coincidences are put into this book in order to make the plot work. We have a guy who is not a spy, but gets caught up in this extraordinary situation, and only he can, do what needs to be done in this story. And along the way, he has a bunch of adventures. He becomes a fugitive from both the law and from a secret terrorist organization that are out to kill him. And it's a lot of fun. He gets a lot of help from a bunch of people who really have no reason to help him at all, considering he's a fugitive from the law, and they should just all be calling the police on this guy. But no, they help him out. And he runs into them when he really needs to run into them in order for the plot to work. It's that kind of story. But, I'm a huge Edgar Rice Burroughs fan, so I'm used to this kind of thing. And I can shrug that kind of stuff off if the story is good. The story in here is good. Very much a product of its time. There are a bunch of prejudices, which are probably Buchan's prejudices, which pop up in this book. There's some anti-Semitism in this book, which pops up, which is unfortunate. That kind of thing. If you read old books, you come to expect that kind of thing, to pop up now and then. But it's always startling and unfortunate. And you do get some of that in this book. However, overall, this is a very entertaining book. And it was a good choice, Roger. I approve this choice of Roger's. The 39 Steps by John Buchan. It's a short book, still plenty of time left in the month. If you want to read it, I highly recommend it. It's fun. What do we have next on the list for Roger's Cheap Old Book Club for next month? For next month, we get to read this. This is next month's pick. Raphael Sabatini's Captain Blood. Captain Blood. Which I don't think I've read since high school. And I loved the movie Captain Blood, which I've seen a bunch of times. It's been a long time actually since I've seen that movie. But when I was younger and we used to watch television that was like commercial network television before there was streaming and internet and all that stuff, Captain Blood would come on television a lot. And I would watch it every time it came on television. It was a great movie and it made me interested in the book. So I finally found a copy of this in my high school library and read it, and it was fantastic. And it's time to read it again. Raphael Sabatini's Captain Blood. This is next month's pick for Rogers Cheaple Book Club. Look forward to that. So what am I reading now? Oh wait, there was one other thing I was reading. Let's talk about the other thing I've been reading, which of course is Thor. I've been reading Thor. So I am on, right at the moment, Thor Epic Collection Volume 11, which has stories from 1981 to 1982. Now, the past week, I've been reading stories that would be in Epic Collection Volume 10 if a Volume 10 existed. These are not published chronologically, so there are a bunch of gaps in the Epic Collections. And I hit one of those gaps. And since I'm reading every issue of Thor from the first run of Thor, everything from the early 60s to the mid 90s when it ended, you know, I had to get a bunch of issues of Thor digitally. And I read them on my tablet, which is not my favorite way to read comics, even though they did look pretty good. Unfortunately, they didn't count for the 500 book challenge because I just got them specifically for this project. This, however, is an Epic Collection I've had for a while, so this does count. This will count once I finish it. But it's been an interesting time on Thor. Roy Thomas took over the book, and he forgot all about Thor's Earth adventures, really, and concentrated on Thor's time in Asgard, and he had a bunch of adventures with the Eternals. He had this big epic Eternals saga where Thor becomes involved with not just the Eternals, but all the other gods of all the other pantheons. And it was this huge epic thing, which came to a conclusion in issue 300 of Thor, which was magnificent. Unfortunately, Roy Thomas had to leave before that issue was written because his contract, he couldn't get his contract renewed at Marvel. So he left Marvel and went to work for DC, I think. And so his whole plot and the conclusion of that whole Eternal saga had to be concluded by Grunwald. I think it was Mark Grunwald who did it. And Mark Grunwald and Ralph Macchio finished up that. The art was all done by Keith Pollard, who is an artist I've come to appreciate. I never really thought too much of him back in the day, but reading all of these issues of Thor, most of which I've never read before, I've really come to appreciate Keith Pollard. He was an artist that was used a lot in Marvel. I think he got kind of burned out because he left during the 1990s and became a computer programmer, I believe. He went to work on computers or with computers and just gave up being a comic book artist. Big career switch there. But his art actually is really good. What issue am I on now? I'm on issue 304, and Keith Pollard is still doing the art. And he's really good. I like how he lays out a page. He's really good at drawing Thor. I mean, he's no Jack Kirby, you know. He's no John Buscema, but he's pretty darn good. And so I think this epic collection that I'm reading now has mostly art by Keith Pollard. So that's good. So we'll see how this is. And the thing I'm reading now, other than Thor, is City. I'm reading City by Clifford D. Samac, which is my favorite science fiction novel of all time. It's basically a fix-up novel where we have a bunch of different stories all tied together and put into one book, which tell an overarching story. And it works really well. This fix-up novels are pretty common in science fiction because so much was written as short stories for the magazines. And as far as fix-up novels go, this could be the best that I've read. I like this even more than The Martian Chronicles, which was the same kind of thing. I actually think this works better, even though I love that book. I love City, which is all about humanity abandoning the Earth and the Earth being inherited by dogs and robots. Like in this pretty picture here. Oh, I just dropped something. Like in this pretty picture here, where we have a bunch of dogs and robots, and the dog here is wearing glasses. I think that's a nice touch. I love this book, so I'm reading this right now, City. And I will finally, after I read it, I'll finally do a video about City, because I should, because it certainly is a bookshelf essential, that's for sure. And after I read that, the next thing I'm going to be reading is Jungle Tales of Tarzan. This is the edition with the editions of Tarzan that I first read, which have the black borders. And the cover on this is from Neil Adams. And he does a great cover for Jungle Tales of Tarzan. This is one of my favorite Tarzan books, so I'm looking forward to getting back and reading this again. It's been a while since I've read this one. I am reading all of Edgar Rice Burroughs' books more or less in the order that they were written, more or less. And this is the next one. And I think that's everything. I will shut up now. Do you have anything more to say? Roger's like, nah, I'm good. Okay, guys. Hi. We'll catch you next time.